Welcome to American Medieval, a podcast about the fact that if the United States has never been truly modern, it's probably because we've always been a little bit medieval. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriel, and I've been researching, teaching, and talking about the Middle Ages, well, to anyone who will listen at least, for more than 3 decades. Each week on the show, we'll be joined by an expert scholar who'll share their fascination with, and sometimes their revulsion by, both the medieval world itself as well as the ways the historical period has been remembered and used right here in the USA. Welcome back to American Medieval. Our guest today is John Terry. John is an award-winning history teacher at the Paideia School in Atlanta, and he's been teaching the history of the ancient world to the present in college and high school for over 15 years. He's held all sorts of fun positions and written for public audiences and stuff like that. And John and I have known each other for a long time, so it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. So, we'll get to the more serious stuff in a minute. One of the questions that I like to start out with is maybe just indulge me, all right, with this question. So, okay. Always. Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Within reason.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
That's a good qualifier. So, okay.
Yeah.
Important qualifier, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
So, my question is about time machines.
Mm.
Because all historians, I think this is fair to say all historians, have complicated feelings sometimes about time machines, right? All right. But so for the moment, we have a time machine.
Okay.
All right. And John Terry in 2025 gets to go back in time and is talking to a childhood John Terry.
Oh.
And informs him that future John Terry will be studying in some way the medieval world. What does young John Terry say? How does he react?
Oh man. So in my head, you're going to ask the question of like, where would you go back to? So I was like trying to think of like what the most interesting response would be. Everybody thinks that.
Everybody assumes that. So yeah.
My students ask me that.
Yeah.
I always kind of have a canned answer that's like qualified with, but only for an hour. And I don't want to drink the water or use the bathrooms. Like,
no.
It's just vibes.
Absolutely.
Young John Terry, that's a really interesting question. I have in my possession on my fridge, the next room over, a magnet of very young John Terry. It's like a magnet photo thing that my grandmother had on her fridge for decades. And it's in my possession now. And it's little baby boy John Terry, before the beard, before the questionable advanced degrees, in like this, you've probably seen the type of thing, this like plastic armor set.
Oh, heck yeah.
Breastplate, shield, sword, helmet.
Still on sale at Target and Walmart today.
Of course. Yeah. My kid, I'm sure, will be wearing one someday. But a couple things come to mind there. It's like, I'm lucky to be wearing all those pieces of armor at once because I'm the youngest of 5 and there was a lot of competition for them. And B, if we're going back to kind of like my first kind of awareness of the Middle Ages, it would have been dress up, So
Sure.
I would have think it was really freaking cool that, I'd make a career out of teaching that period and other periods. Maybe later in my childhood, when I was a little less curious than I was at age 4, maybe I would have thought that sounded pretty lame. But then, but that little kid on the fridge, I think, would be pretty thrilled to hear it.
Yeah. Childhood dreams are often kind of weird. Like I think at one point I wanted to be a fire truck. So,
yeah. Very reasonable.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that's very normal. So, but it's interesting. I mean, one of the things, right, is like, that's so fascinating about, especially in the United States, I think this is generally true, but especially in the United States, it's like different paths into the Middle Ages. Like, how do people know about it? How do people, because, it's not often covered, in great depth in K12 education, which we're going to talk about in a minute, of course. But what I'm hearing, right, is like this kind of image of the Middle Ages as kind of knighthood or castles, and it's kind of cool and adventurous, right? And I think that's pretty common, right? I think for, young men especially.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of vibes. And when I ask my kids, like, how do you know anything about the Middle Ages, which I will be doing on Wednesday next week.
Okay.
And what words come to mind and things like that. It's always stuff like that. It's always kind of a Eurocentric vibe, which is not surprising. Sure. It is what it is. And then we kind of dispel that. But it's never Game of Thrones anymore. They're too young.
That's right.
They're too young, Matt.
Yeah.
That was coming out when they were just little babies.
Yeah.
And if this is a safe space to confess it as a medievalist, I've never seen it. So I know the memes. I know the general whatever.
Well, we'll edit that out. That's
fine.
We'll
that's
protect
fine.
you.
Yeah, it's really early in the episode to be admitting things like that. But yeah, that has disappeared from the list of like, how do you know anything, which is really interesting. And I think a lot of that for current 14, 15-year-olds in Atlanta, Georgia is pretty decentered, maybe mirroring the shifting of like social media landscape since 10, 15 years ago. But anyway.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, like, you study this period, like there's always something kind of pop culture-y that often,
for sure.
not always, but often kind of brings people to the study of the Middle Ages when they're in our classrooms.
Yeah.
Regard, high school or college or whatever. And I've been around long enough. I mean, nobody can see my gray hair, but it's everywhere, man.
It's coming in nice.
Yeah. But I've seen waves, right? Like I'm old enough to remember kind of Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code being kind of a big, and then there was Game of Thrones, of course, and then the Vikings TV show that was big for a little while. So it's always something, and it's often video games too. So if it's decentered, because you teach like, as you said, kind of 14, 15-year-olds, like, what is it that keeps them there? Like, there's all sorts of reasons students are in a classroom. Oftentimes it's like a requirement or something like that. Yeah. But something kind of keeps their interest. So like, is there something that's in the 14 to 15-year-old zeitgeist?
That's a great question.
Please tell me about the youngs, is what basically what I'm saying.
The youths. That's a really good question that like, it's not fresh enough on my mind from teaching this a year ago, and it will be fresh on my mind soon. But I think, you've written about Chapel Roan and sort of her like leaning all the way into neo-medievalism to like really interesting effect. And there's not a single student I teach who hasn't at least heard of her.
Sure.
But there's always, this is where sometimes I kind of wish I were lurking on TikTok to get a sense of like what kind of medieval shit is out there for their consumption.
Yeah.
And that would be a good question, I think, for a handful, like a subsection of some of my more interesting students in the near future. But honestly, I'm not sure. There's not like one big cultural thing that's out there that can be a touchstone that features like dragons and people in veils and intrigue and swords, right? I don't know of anything right now. Maybe you know better than I do, maybe.
No, I don't. And you will have to be on TikTok at least a little bit to hear like the clips of the show that will be on TikTok that will be shared about you at the very least.
Maybe this is my reason.
This is the reason. There you go.
I'm never really looking for more reasons to be on social media, but here we are.
No, there's like no reason whatsoever. So it's just we're always searching for time to spend, on our phones, basically.
100%.
So, and I feel great making a podcast contributing to this.
Yes.
So it's just like, it's great in my soul. Anyway, about that, but about the Middle Ages too, like I think what you said at the very beginning about like, and you dressing up, like a lot of it's vibes, it seems. And that seems to be what's interesting now. And even like when I was younger, when I was playing with like medieval, like knight Legos or things like that, or like finding stuff in the public library, like I have no idea like what it was that attracted me to that. Like, but I think maybe that's something that's been a constant. And there's these eruptions, like we were talking about Dan Brown, Game of Thrones, stuff like that kind of bring a lot more people in. But there is like a kind of a constant hum, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there is. Totally. And thinking back to childhood, I'm also thinking of those like wonderful, I think, DK books that like kind of the How Stuff Made type stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I found in one from the 70s the other day in a bookshop about a like fictional Gothic cathedral that like walks through how all of these things are made. So thinking about those little like nerdy touchstones from a childhood in books is really important for me. But I think a lot of my students, for them, it kind of depends on their level of consumption of certain Disney movies as well.
Sure.
The classics still, in certain households, the classics are still on repeat. Things like How to Train Your Dragon that kind of like get into this like little world building for kids. But again, like for older kids and young adults, there has been those big things of like each decade of this century so far with Dan Brown into Game of Thrones. And I'm not sure this decade really has that yet.
Yeah.
But I'm with you there, circling back to what you said about, the Dan Brown stuff. Like as I was, I guess, finishing college and starting my PhD, that's the reason I never wanted to say what I did to someone on a plane when they asked. It's like they were going to talk about the Vatican archives for the next 3 hours. And I'm not into that, so, but now I'm a little bit less, I guess maybe because of that decentering and there's not like that one thing out there that I'm aware of, at least it feels a little bit less risky, but it does offer an opportunity for other people to like do this kind of word dump of what they know, my students included, which is fun. It can be fun, at least.
No, it's absolutely. I mean, those are oftentimes some of the most fun conversations. And like you were just saying, right? Like they can happen in a classroom or they can happen like on an airplane or like in a, in a bar or something like that. It's just like you mentioned what you do. And then like somebody knows something, right?
Yeah,
Like
they do.
they've been to a Ren fair, they watched Game of Thrones back in the day. They've seen a cathedral or even like you were mentioning, like the DK books, David Macaulay, like his
100%.
like cathedral castle, stuff like that. Like
Brilliant.
those kinds of cross section, super interesting things that I remember like lying on on the shag carpet in my house, of course, because I'm that old, and just like staring at the detail, and they're just kind of poring over the little set pieces.
Yeah.
There was nothing kind of attractive to it. And then, like you said, like then it's just kind of in the air with Disney, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a super interesting kind of element as well, is like we're consuming in this country oftentimes medieval, especially as young people, I should say, are consuming medievalism without even realizing it.
Oh, completely. And on the flip side of that, what's also interesting to me is movie stars that all of my kids know, all of my students know, Timothée Chalamet.
Does it have to be said like
it has to be said like that?
Yeah.
Like
Okay,
it's not
enough.
real Timothée Chalamet unless it's from the certain zip code he grew up or whatever. But I don't think any of them know that he was in that movie from a few years back, The King.
Yeah.
Which I guess, gosh, it's been several years since I've seen it, but it struck me as including really brilliant moments of intrigue as well as battle scenes, which it wasn't very cinematic and it was muddy and gory and gross and very shovey. And that's like pretty realistic. So I'm not sure like my average 9th grader or 11th and 12th grader, they know about him. They may be healthily obsessed with him. I'm not sure they know about that though. So there's just like this kind of adjacent world where like actors will dip into the medieval and it's like for us, it's for the grown-ups, you know what I mean? But it's not necessarily translating to them unless there's like a meme that emerges from it.
Yeah. And again, like that kind of like social media, again, like I feel like we're being evangelists for social media in a really unhelpful way right now, but it's important for medievalism. So we're taking the challenge.
It is. Oh yeah. Well,
No, I mean, yeah, like, absolutely. So
it really is outreach.
Yeah. And then, like just the way that it can clip things, on TikTok or like on Instagram Reels or something like that. So
certainly.
So if we could move just off of social media for a moment there. So,
we'll be back.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, is there anything else to talk about than what we've seen on our phones recently or heard on our phones recently? And you can subscribe to this podcast on any of the major podcast platforms.
Mash that like button.
Mash, like, and subscribe. There you go. I feel so hollow having said that, but please do actually mash and like and subscribe. Anyway, but back into towards the classroom is like, so you like most scholars who work on the Middle Ages oftentimes work, or at least the popular perception of scholars, I should say, like work at the college and university level. Yeah. You do not. So like, how did that transition kind of work from you? Could you talk a little bit about kind of like what interested you in kind of teaching at that level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, circumstance for one thing. When I finished my PhD, I kind of took one crack at the job market. And I think I recall one of my many brilliant Christmas gifts to my now wife that year was not applying to the directional school in a certain Great Plains state, right? So that's kind of where we were, you have to be really willing to do all these things, be willing to live anywhere, et cetera. And kind of in the life we were making together, we just really weren't. And so that really obviously limits somebody whose job market is really narrowly defined. But, emerging for grad school, I love teaching. I loved it since the very first section I was in charge of in fall of 2009. There's something about it, the back and forth, sometimes electricity, sometimes really like awful, awkward moments of silence that you're desperate to fill, but then over time learn to just let be. So I knew I loved that. And we were already moving to Atlanta, where I still live now. And my wife had been offered a job at a local school here. She's also a high school history teacher. We are super cute. So I put out some feelers for high school teaching because I kind of was getting to know that world a little bit. And we got lucky getting those jobs at the same time. And I was at my previous schools for 8 years. My current school, this is my 3rd year. And that transition was really interesting because you go from being like kind of the expert on that one topic your dissertation's on.
Yeah.
To, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing at all. Like, yeah, you've taught some world history, but like most of my TA assignments and also courses I was an instructor for were like Eurocentric or Mediterranean centric, which is great. And I loved it. But all of a sudden you're tasked with teaching 11th graders world history from, 500 BC to present. So relying on senior colleagues who were super generous and helpful things like that were crucial, but also like kind of looking back on that time. And this is also like kind of getting into advice for recent PhDs who are interested in doing this.
Sure. Yeah.
You may have had dreams of being the scholar, you know, that you really wanted to be years ago or now. It's not very possible teaching high school. Like your days are full, but if you want to jump both feet first into it, it's a hugely rewarding career path. But yeah, kind of reflecting on that transition too, I think one of the things that surprised me is that the European Middle Ages started kind of slipping down the list of things I was really excited to teach. Like as I learned more and more about,
yeah.
I know, spicy. As I learned more and more about other cultures and societies, and even getting into the, we can edit this out, modern era.
It's not called American Modern, John.
Yeah,
it's not the name of the podcast.
I'll see myself out. You can use an AI version of me for the rest of this if you want.
Fantastic.
Yes. But yeah, kind of like seeing the European Middle Ages as one part of like a constellation of things that are worth teaching was really healthy for me and kind of humbling. So at the previous school I was at, and I'll wrap up this kind of long autobiographical answer, you know, I would teach the European Middle Ages for 2-3 weeks and move on. So it's like, oh shit, you got to make choices about this period.
Yeah.
That is kind of your reason for being in this job, right? It kind of gave you everything from the frustration to the passion for history. So that was a really weird thing to do and to learn. And within that, making choices and like, how deep do we want to go? And how much of my research do I want to fit in here for 10th graders? The answer is pretty much none, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was fine. It was just kind of a learning curve. But also thinking about where I currently am, I'm able to teach a lot more electives in my current job. I've taught a medieval Africa course 2 years in a row. I'm currently teaching a course on Rome and its afterlives. And we do a lot of short terms in January and May. So I've done a history of Jerusalem. I'm about to co-teach with an amazing colleague, Amy Manlapis. I'm about to co-teach a course on Vikings in January. So I'm kind of getting back the band back together a little bit with things that I really haven't taught in depth in about 12, 13 years. So really long way of saying it's rocky, but find those people when you transition from that career to that career. Find those people you can really rely on and kind of be honest about what you need in terms of lesson plans and advice.
No, and I think that, you know, we're kind of instilled oftentimes, those are, you know, if you've had any experience kind of going through grad school, oftentimes instilled that this is a solitary pursuit, especially in the humanities, generally in history, specifically in medieval history, even more specifically. You might be in a program, you're the only medievalist there, right?
Totally.
Like, so it really quickly becomes, if you open your eyes, a community. And so I think that's really great, just kind of general advice for anybody who's interested in anything is like, just ask people, like rely upon expertise, ask questions, stuff like that. I send emails, you know, I've been doing this 30 years, right? Like I send emails every day asking people like, hey, what about this source? What about this thing? Like, do you know where I could find out information on that? And people are generous and they respond. So,
they really are. And they like to be asked.
They like to be asked.
Yeah.
So, I love getting emails. No, let me condition that. I do not like getting all the emails that I get. So
yeah. Certain emails.
Yeah, certain emails. So I've been to enough meetings. Thank you. So I want to go back and then I want to transition to, because you mentioned kind of, I think this is something I'm really excited to talk to you about is the Middle Ages outside of Europe specifically. But going back, like if you can kind of dredge into your mind when you were talking about medieval Europe specifically, when you had to cover it in those 3 weeks, what did you often talk about? Like what were some of the highlights that you kind of pulled out? Do you remember kind of what students responded to? And then kind of this is a lot of questions, sorry. And then are there state standards that you have to kind of hit specifically related to the Middle Ages?
It's a great question. I'll kind of work backwards.
Yeah.
So related to my previous answer, I never set out to be a high school history teacher for my career.
Yes.
It just kind of happened. And the way it happened was like, hey, I'm going to try this out and also direct deposit and health insurance, please, and see how it goes. So I wanted to try it out in a space where I didn't have to jump through the hoops of like getting a teacher's license and thinking about state standards too much, because that was a little bit beyond what I wanted to do at the time. So I've been kind of as an accident in the independent school since then. So we don't have to worry about state standards. It's like, it's two things. Number one, you don't technically have to worry about it. But number two, if you get onto your local private schools' websites, if they say anything about their history curriculum, it's pretty much the state standards.
Yeah.
They're all kind of like reflecting sometimes a little more palely reflecting than other times. And right now I'm at a school where autonomy of teachers is really valued, which has a couple of, good and bad sides to it sometimes.
Sure.
But in general, people are kind of teaching to those standards without knowing it because standards are so broad. If you want a thrilling bedtime reading, Google your state standards, download the PDF, and see what it says about like your field of study. It's simultaneously heartening maybe to find it there at all, if you're fortunate, but then really horrifying. It's like 3 bullet points that kind of end in an increasingly vague way. So you can get to it any way you want. So I've actually spent a good deal of time looking at state standards because when I'm trying to publish some written work on teaching, even as an independent school person, like I'm not really doing a good job if I'm not including several paragraphs about how to do this to state standards, because it's kind of the be all end all depending on the district you're in.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important too for listeners is they might think of kind of high school teaching in the same way they think of college teaching as just kind of the same.
Yeah, not at all.
Right. Like even within a state, but like, no, it's not. Like there's, as you said, independent schools, private schools, public schools, variety of different curricula that's there.
Yeah.
So for you, like what was the Middle Ages within that for your experience?
Within that?
Sorry, European Middle Ages.
The European Middle Ages, when I was teaching them for, the 3-week chunks or whatever, it was kind of the transformation versus fall of Rome discourse. And then suddenly there's Charlemagne, and there's sometimes beef with popes before, during, and after that. And the First Crusade is the only crusade that matters. That's the only crusade that I make time for.
Yeah.
Because within the First Crusade, you can really pull out all the themes and tensions of other conflicts we call the Crusade.
Absolutely. Sure.
And then from there, it's kind of, this is like, it's brutal, but it's kind of fast forwarding to the late Middle Ages and Protestant Reformation, right? So everything I just said, like it takes real focus to get that into 3 weeks for a 10th grader or an 11th grader, right? It's rough. It's rough out there, Matt.
But it does make me happy anytime anybody skips the 12th century. Because I'm so tired of the 12th century.
Your boy has been skipping it for years.
But it's almost like a greatest hits,
it is a greatest hits.
Like, and there's a variety of ways to kind of do that. But oftentimes, and like I think the way that you handle it like seems to make a lot of sense because it's stuff that people can kind of latch onto, right? Like quote unquote fall of Rome, Charlemagne, another guy, First Crusade, Black Death, Protestant Reformation. Like those are the big highlights. So
well, they are things that some students have heard of.
Yeah.
They are great laboratories for thinking about systems and patterns and how humans are messy. But also a few years ago, in a kind of clarifying moment during online COVID teaching in the spring of 2020, I'm struggling with like, what am I doing with these Zoom classes? And then I kind of landed on the fact that like, hey, what are the time periods that I have left to cover that actually, if more people knew about them, the world would be a little better, might even potentially save lives if people understood the history of religious tension and religious violence. So if you kind of break it down as like a triage system of like, hey, I've got until December 15th, what emerges here as what I consider to be indispensable information? And if your answer to that is everything, keep asking yourself that question because you have 3 total hours of class time.
Yeah. I struggle with this every time I teach my intro course, which is a medieval survey. So I have a whole semester to talk about the Middle Ages, but it's always the things I know something about that are the most difficult lectures to give, right?
Definitely.
Like, on the 12th century, right? Like, or the expansion of trade networks in the late Middle Ages. Like, I know exactly an hour and 15 minutes worth of material on that.
That's it.
Like,
famously, there's no more new research on that period. So you're
literally
good. You don't
none.
have to worry about
it. Exactly. I can talk about it, and then like maybe I can extemporaneous if the student has a question for 5 minutes after that. Otherwise, like then I'm like, I got to go. I got another meeting. Have a great day. So
I mean, that right there is the tension of teaching things that we know a lot about, or teaching things that we're always learning more about. Because like every time, like in my Rome seminar, I've got this plan, and I had all the students sign up for Pass Imperfect with Sarah Bond and many other excellent scholars. And it's like, well, crap, why did I do that? Because every other week they're dropping stuff that I want to include in my curriculum. Like I really shot myself in the foot here. So the more you learn, it's like, well, where can I fit this in? And then you have to ask yourself, like, is it truly worth it? Because at the end of the day, you do have this set amount of time.
Yeah. But I mean, I think there's a value too, right? In
always
conveying that excitement about studying the past.
I'm not trying to say learning is bad. Just want to clarify for your listeners.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Learning is great.
Learning is great. Okay. All right.
That's my hot take. Actually, it reminds me a little bit. I think a few years ago, you posted an anonymous course eval about like reading is great or learning is great, but
yeah, learning is great, but he made me do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I sometimes apologize to my students for making them learn in school. They love that. It gets a laugh every time.
It gets a laugh every time. Dad jokes.
Yep.
Dad jokes go a long way oftentimes in the classroom. So
I come by it honest now. I got a toddler in the house.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, you're entering your dad era.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So to go back though, so
sure.
Now you're teaching different things, like you said, and I'm really interested, especially you mentioned kind of medieval Africa, but also kind of the idea of the Middle Ages kind of outside of Europe. Now, before we do that, I think we should say the term's kind of fraught applying medieval to areas outside of Europe. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about. Both the popular perception and for many decades, centuries, the scholarly consensus is that medieval equals European. That filters into the popular imagination. Like I said, every time I ask a room full of students, whether they're 14 or 18, what comes to mind when I say medieval, it's top to bottom pop cultural, whatever references that are European coded.
Mm-hmm.
In my classes, we're not really, I think, at the level where I'm going to introduce them to all the literature on whether or not to call Africa medieval or Asia medieval.
Yeah, no, fair. Yeah.
Fair. I do solicit their takes on it after we do medieval Europe, which I cover after medieval Africa. But one of the things that really helped clarify this for me is there's this little moment in the introduction to a book I teach in my medieval Africa seminar called The Golden Rhinoceros, Histories of the African Middle Ages.
Great book.
It's a great book. It's fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
By Fauvel. Gosh, his first name is completely blank from my mind. But again, I blame my toddler for all slips of memory. But anyway, he talks about how whether you're talking about Aksum in East Africa or Mali in West Africa or societies north of the Sahara Desert, they are all taking part in the system that we call medieval, religiously, in terms of trade and economy, in terms of culture. They're all very different and diverse societies, of course. But if we're going to consider Islam of what's now Syria, Lebanon, part of the medieval world, why are we not considering Islamic traditions in Timbuktu or Janneh to be equally medieval as they are in Iberia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or Christianities from Northern Europe versus Christianities that are entrenched centuries before they were in Northern Europe in what's now Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So when you think about the term as a useful stand-in for a really large system, however you want to define it, it makes a lot of sense from a teaching perspective. Now, is this a hill I'm going to die on? Absolutely not. But as a teacher who's trying to break things down for teenagers, it's really, really useful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that all teachers kind of realize along the way, right? Is that you talk about the same material different ways to different audiences.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like as you were saying, if you're talking about Aksum or Mali or something like that, these civilizations of sub-Saharan Africa, you're just going to do it differently in a grad seminar as opposed to even an upper level undergraduate seminar as opposed to an intro course as opposed to a high school. And I think that's fine. You're not telling lies or anything like that. It's just but people need a baseline in order to understand it. If it's a framework that helps them understand, then I think that does a certain amount of work, right?
Absolutely right. Now, with my 11th and 12th graders, we can get into critiques of those terms in a way that I'm not going to do with my 9th graders. It's not that some of them aren't fully capable, but as groups, it's not I think, pedagogically appropriate. But at the end of the day, it's periodization. This is always fraught. We're always publishing on this. We're always talking about this. I'm not going to spend a month with my 11th and 12th graders talking about the perils of periodization. It's worth talking about and being aware of.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I've got until 10:15 and then it's an assembly.
Yeah.
So we need to have words that save time, frankly.
Yeah. There's always a rush. There's always a bell or something like that.
Yeah.
But could we back up for a second too?
Yeah.
Because I think many readers, this might be the first time they're hearing about kind of Aksum and Mali.
Sure,
Can you just generally give us a sense of kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about kind of quote unquote medieval Africa?
Absolutely. So I'll kind of answer this and another question maybe at the same time, which is why start your medieval unit with Africa? The reason I do that is because I've just taught my students a lot of religious literacy, especially ancient Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the African continent contains the places where those religions go outside of their kind of original homelands the soonest.
Yeah.
The kingdom of Aksum, alternatively spelled Axum or Aksum, is roughly in what's now modern-day Ethiopia and East Africa. King Izana of Aksum is putting crosses on his coins by like the 350s, right? I mean, that's not really even a symbol that is being adopted in the Roman world yet in a mainstream context.
Not in any way, yeah.
Various kingdoms that will later constitute the Kingdom of Mali in West Africa are becoming Islamic by the late 900s and early 1000s, which when you think about the geographic scope between the Arabian Peninsula, between North Africa and West Africa, it's relatively swift. So it makes perfect sense to me to talk about the places where these religions that we associate so deeply with a medieval system, where do they go outside of their kind of original homelands?
Yeah.
And the answer in a lot of cases is Africa. And even when we think about various medieval Jewish diasporas, the Cairo Geniza of the 1100s and 1200s,
absolutely,
and other centuries, I'm sure, is a rich source of information about Jewish life in Cairo in the kind of the Central Middle Ages. These are communities that are deeply embedded in their city-states, in their kingdoms, and their empires for centuries before even parts of Europe start to Christianize or become Islamic, or before Jewish communities start turning up. So it makes perfect chronological sense for me to engage that geography and that chronology in that religious medieval system for my students.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's always interesting to talk to students about, because they do come with oftentimes these Eurocentric, and not conscious necessarily, but Eurocentric. It's
not their fault.
It's not their fault. It's what's taught to them. But even just introducing the idea of permeability, which is a term I just really kind of love, that David and I talked about in the Bright Ages, but I talked about with teaching beforehand, is just the idea that people did move, right?
Yes.
Because, I mean, that's another preconception about the medieval world generally, is that everything was stable, static, transportation kind of collapse. And that's just not true.
Yeah,
right.
Correct.
So, because we are talking about vast distances between kind of the Kingdom of Mali and the Arabian Peninsula, let alone kind of Baghdad or points further east for the Islamic world. And then Aksum, like you said, versus, London or points north of there in England or in Scandinavia. That's a long way.
Yeah, a little figurine of the Buddha showing up in a Viking burial. That happens for the same reason that we find Venetian glass in Great Zimbabwe in southern Africa, because these are items that are in demand, and there are the logistical processes to bring them to those places. And
that's right.
People can possess these things from any reasons, all the way from religious devotion to, I think it's cool and I want to be buried with it, right?
Yeah.
So they're getting to these places for the same reasons. And in many ways, this period that people popularly associated with a great slowing down and closing off, we actually see an acceleration of trade for reasons that I'm not an expert enough to get into, but it's something that's really exciting to teach students. And I'm lucky to have, colleagues at my current school who do that much better than I do.
Yeah. When objects move, people move with them.
Yeah,
right?
certainly.
So you saw, as I'm sure you've been following, is, archaeological discoveries in northern England in the 5th and 6th century, right? Like people of West African descent, just buried, parts of the community, not ostracized, certainly not of a subservient status by anything that we could tell. They just happen to have descended from West African DNA. So
they were just there.
They were just there.
And I think for people who have been paying attention to this type of thing, historians, this is not surprising.
Not at all.
I mean, it's surprising and perplexing and disturbing to the worst people in the world who turn up at the big rally in London a couple of weeks ago. But sorry, I don't want to get political on this podcast. But for people who really kind of pay attention to the way people have historically moved and move into the 20th and 21st century, it's not surprising at all.
No, not at all. It's reported breathlessly, but historians are just like, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, that's another one. So but archaeologists are very good at getting media attention. People like archaeological discoveries.
Yeah, this find rewrites the history of XYZ.
Yes. Well, I mean, in fairness, those are often written by university PR departments, which are looking for. Archaeologists themselves are just they're content in their ditches. It's just oh yeah, no, I found a bone fragment. This is cool.
Yeah, we love them. Yeah.
So I say that as a failed archaeologist too. So there's so I started out there, but left. History is where it's at. So
yeah.
Anyway. Thanks for listening to American Medieval. But hey, also check out another podcast from Multitude. Simple and Clean is a podcast about the video game franchise Kingdom Hearts, hosted by Misha Stanton and Mayana Baron and friends. They talk about the plot, of course, characters, world building, music, fashion, the fan base, and societal impact of a thing that by all means probably shouldn't even exist. Never heard of Kingdom Hearts? That's fine. They're here to break it down for you, explain why they love it, and hopefully convince you that this weird little story deserves a place in your heart. Be a weirdo along with us and listen to new episodes every Sunday. Now back to the show. So thank you for the summary kind of about medieval Africa. So like, how do students tend to react? Like, you've been teaching this for a while, and then there's attentiveness to other places outside of Europe within this medieval context. Like, do they think about it kind of comparatively with Europe, or are they just kind of interested in it not for its own right, but just kind of like letting it stand on its own?
Yeah. Part of it is how I frame it, right?
Sure.
Starting that big medieval unit with like, free ride on what you think of, that kind of stuff. So they get to do their own kind of personal myth busting. And then within that, we get to think about like what their preconceptions about Africa in the past are. And I try to like cultivate like a pretty like open discussion about this stuff as we go. So it's kind of, it's hard for them to compare them to European analogies until we get to that part of the unit.
Sure.
But by the time we finish that unit, kind of the long arc of it ends typically in December, where I have a project where they're globalizing European medieval cathedrals and thinking about their materiality, everything from saints' relics, which we could do a whole podcast on how weird that is to teach to a 15-year-old. But relics to manuscripts to precious stones and precious metals, and trying to research like where these things ultimately came from. So like these are simultaneously intensely local and intensely global spaces. So by the time they get to that, they don't really take much convincing. I guess partly because we've centered the map well outside of Europe, and then we've kind of moved that way because of chronology and the kind of themes that we're chasing down. So it's really fun because by the end of that, we look back at our lists, which I keep in these journals and on my shelf that they write in. And, we think about like, okay, what do you do with this knowledge now? Like you're a very different person than you were on like October 23rd or whatever. What are you going to do about it now? How are you going to use it to like inform the way you look at the world? And I think part of what those discussions yield to me is like a willingness of young people to get outside themselves. And especially like my students who adhere to a Christian tradition in Atlanta, to think about why that tradition exists. Is it the only tradition that's worthwhile within Christianity even? My Ethiopian students, I don't have to convince them at all of any of this because they're like, we know.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority, I guess, of my students, it really helps them think outside of their self by thinking out way outside of Europe. And by including Europe in that constellation, I think that's actually really helpful to me as a teacher. I'm not really interested in excluding Europe because it's somehow Eurocentric to teach Europe. Like, sorry, but like it's part of this world, but it is part of this world that has centers of power and economy and culture.
Yeah.
And it's one or several pieces of that as opposed to the center from which all civilization is emanating, which is like kind of the textbook version of what I grew up with.
The subtle ways that we can, as teachers, do that really heavy work just by the way that we present the material. Like you said, like just starting outside of Europe when you're talking about the Middle Ages shows that there were other places that were going on, right? Like even if you just, flip that and worked from Europe outwards, then you're still doing the work of saying like, okay, the Middle Ages are really here, but there's interesting comparisons elsewhere.
Yeah.
But moving in, like, or not in, but like moving back to Europe at the end, showing how everything else is kind of functioning in Europe is in some ways reacting to that, or can be seen as reacting to that. I think can do really interesting work, right?
Yeah, and connecting this back to the state standards conversation, I mean, I haven't looked it up in all 50 states and plus U.S. territories, but like, I think my boy Ibn Battuta is probably in all of them because he's just singular as a travel writer from the 14th century. So if you're kind of tied to that as a state standard, man, what a great opportunity to get inland a little bit. He goes to coastal areas of Africa. These are connected to Great Zimbabwe. They're connected to other places. Compare how he experiences those places with how he experiences Spain and Eastern Europe. And the conclusion is that, like, there's no one center of everything anywhere he goes. Everywhere he goes, he complains a little bit about the food and the manners and the weird customs and how people dress. And he's a little bit of a diva and would have done very well on TikTok. But the point is like kind of decentering the Middle Ages by centering non-European places that ought to be centered for all the reasons we've discussed is, man, it's a lot more fun way to teach for me, at least.
Yeah, no, I haven't read Ibn Battuta in such a while, but like it's all kind of flooding back, like how bitchy he really
Oh, he's
kind
so
of
bitchy.
is.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
he's just like, oh, the food's kind of weird, and like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't like where I stayed, and like, oh, I
Yeah.
gotta keep going, and the locals are weird. He's just
Yeah. Everything smells weird.
everything smells weird. He's like such a
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. He
yeah.
could absolutely have like an Instagram or a TikTok, like this kind of travel thing.
Yeah. And he's being put up by a sultan for 6 months and like
Exactly. Yeah.
accumulating a couple of wives along the way, right? It's fine. But students actually pick up on this. They like, hey, yeah, this is what we do. Like, I've complained about the food on vacation with my parents.
Yeah.
And even like some of my students that like come from wealthier backgrounds, they become really self-aware of it. It's like, oh yeah, this dude is complaining in ways that are very familiar to me. And I find that to be a lot of fun. Yeah.
No, that's fun. One of the things that's always fun about kind of teaching too, and I'm curious about your experience at your level too, is those sources, because we're so fortunate to have so many of these sources translated into English available for us in the United States to be able to give them to students. Like, do they respond well to them when you give that to them generally?
Usually after a while, right?
Okay. Takes a little bit.
Takes a minute, yeah.
Because they're weird, right? Like for first glance, yeah.
They're weird. And I'm thinking about my ninth graders right now when I think about weird times with primary sources. I kick off the whole year spending a lot of time with Roman foundation myths because I find it to be a just brilliant laboratory for figuring out what a primary source is. What does it mean when somebody's writing about something 700 years later? And oh, by the way, it never happened. So they're already primed. By the time we get to the Middle Ages, they're already primed to think on a couple of different levels. Like, hey, what part of this excerpt from a hagiography passes the smell test is something we can tell about this culture, and what part are kind of tilting into the miraculous, which like, hey, great if you're a person of faith, but when we're like putting on the historian hat, it's like that functions for a specific audience. So it's really hard. Like kids developmentally at that age and appropriately are like really pretty literal.
Yeah.
And the progress to like thinking more metaphorically and abstractly, it's really uneven at age 14, age 15, and it's radically different at age 17 and 18.
Sure.
I can't really remember this in my own development, but I'm experiencing that every day with them.
I think we still struggle, right? Because there's also
definitely,
like, because we're always conditioned, like at every level, especially with history, is that history is a record of things that happened.
Yeah, things that happened, yes.
Right? And so, like, you were saying miracles, and that immediately, like, all in my introductory courses or even my upper level, like, oftentimes I want to know, like, did the miracle happen?
Yeah.
And just trying to get them to think, like, well, that's a separate question, and we can put that over here. But like, what is the miracle doing in the story, and why is it there, and what is it telling us? What's it for? Right? Like, that's a different level of understanding. That once they get there, like, oh man, they're into it. So
So thinking about miracle stories and hagiography and relics, like we talked about, like it's weird and fun, but it can be really frustrating as a teacher because, like, I get it, I understand it, and I don't understand always how to explain it to this age group. There's no great analogy from our lives that can explain this. Like, it's like, yeah, they're superheroes, these saints, sure, but like, there's no analogy that would exist that like helps us really understand that. Like, you're not going to your local comic book store that has the finger bone of Wolverine and it cured your aunt of cancer, right? How do you explain that, right? Like, it's just impossible.
The finger bone of Wolverine cured your aunt of cancer.
Well, yeah, plus the nail.
That's that's
your soundbite, Matt.
There you go. Yeah.
So yeah, you just have to get in it and ask them questions.
Yeah.
Get them in little groups, generate questions that we can answer together, because there's no point A to point B. There's not going to be a direct line. That's going to be a struggle. And I'm sure you find it with your students who are like, allegedly adults. It's really hard.
Sure, yeah, but I think they're conditioned to kind of think of history, despite the work of lots of history teachers who are doing kind of this work. Like, they're just kind of being bombarded culturally. And then I think, like, I teach at a primarily engineering school. And so like my introductory course is a gen ed requirement. So I get a lot of people who are not.
Yeah. You're ministering to the STEM kids. It's part of your ministry.
I am. Yeah. I'm actually listening to them and, asking them what they think. So, which they do appreciate, and they seem to come back for more. But again, just like it's idea about information delivery. I mean, I read a really dumb op-ed piece today.
You don't say.
Yeah, like basically AI is going to replace teachers,
Oh,
but the whole
Jesus.
premise was again just like the idea that teachers are simply information delivery and
Yeah.
you can ask AI for
Yeah.
information, which you can't because AI is often wrong. Let's be
Yeah.
clear about that.
Yeah.
But that's not actually what teachers do, right?
Right.
Like the difference between knowledge creation and information delivery is the gulf is vast.
Yeah.
It's the former, the knowledge creation that we're really trying to do. I will sit down, you will sit down and walk them through a hagiography and
Mm-hmm.
explain the context, the narrative choices, the allusions to previous text, the
Yeah.
biblical
Yeah.
references, why they're there and why, they're talking about. You will be, I'm sure, familiar with this, is one of the sources I always love to teach, and I teach it every year in my intro course, is Felix's Life of Guthlac.
Yeah. Oh, man. The Welsh-speaking demons.
I love it. Yeah, the demons who are carting people off to hell.
Yeah.
But like there's also this one little thing which students get hung up on, and it's so great to walk them through it, which is that they keep talking about the desert.
Oh, yeah. The desert. Yeah.
The desert in East Anglia, in the
Yeah.
marshes, literally the swamp of East
Yeah. The
Anglia.
swamps.
And just trying to get them to think about like, okay, they're living in a swamp. It's very clear they're living in a swamp. They talk about the
Yeah.
swamp and how wet it is and how boggy it is all the time, but they keep saying desert. Why are they saying desert, guys?
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, no, maybe it's like a metaphor. It's like, okay, keep going.
Keep
It's
going,
like,
keep
no,
going. You're
yeah,
almost
keep
there.
going. Yeah, you're almost there. It's like, oh, it's a reference. Does it sound like any other sources we've read? It's just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, this other stuff. So
Yeah.
those are the types of things that I think, regardless of the level, right, that teachers can kind of do.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, I know that they're currently in an English class, right? I know they know
Yep.
what a metaphor is.
Yep.
But that question that you said, some variation of what does it remind you of? Man, that's gold right there. That is that is a go-to question if there ever was one, especially like in your case when you've covered the desert mothers and fathers, and it's like, well, what do you do when you don't have a desert, right? You make one, and
Mhm.
sometimes maybe you insist that like, hey, this is actually worse than the desert because of the bugs. So like it's effective.
I mean, fair.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah, the swamps of the fins, man. Yeah.
Yeah, not great. So,
Yeah. It's a brilliant source. I'm glad to hear that you teach it and they get a lot out of it.
oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
it got drilled into me actually in graduate school, and then
Yeah.
I've used it ever since. So because it's just such a fun bonkers course. It has a little
It's
bit
wild.
of everything. So, and it's really delightful. It also has kings showing up. So
Yeah.
listeners, run to your local internet
Mhm.
and find Felix's Life of Guthlac.
Thought you were about to say your local bookstore. I'm like, what bookstores are you going to?
Sir, not where I live. I will
Yeah,
tell you
same.
that.
Girl,
So,
same.
yeah. But, one of the things about primary sources, and maybe this brings us back kind of
Yeah,
full
yeah.
circle as we're kind of nearing the end of our conversation, unfortunately, is back to time machines. Because one of the things primary sources can do, right, is
Yeah.
it allows you to understand kind of from the perspective of the period what's going on, with caveats and all those kinds of things. So you said you had kind of a stock answer about when you are asked, because you get asked, I get asked, everybody gets asked, right? Like about time machines. So what's your stock answer? If you could go back
Yeah.
to a period in history, where would it be?
With the guarantee that
That you could come back.
I could come
Absolutely.
back like maybe
1000%.
2 hours later.
No, you could do 10 minutes, an hour,
Yep.
whatever you want. Yeah, that's totally fine.
I'm not eating the food. I'm not drinking the water.
Heck
I'm
no.
not using the bathroom. Like I'm in and out a couple hours. I should narrow this down to a specific year or date or moment, but it would be probably early 1500s Venice.
Oh,
Just
okay.
to feel the vibes and see the colors and
Yeah.
check out the shipbuilding and hear all the different languages and see what buildings that I'm a little bit familiar with now look like back then.
Yeah.
Buildings that didn't exist yet, what was there. I think that would be just tremendous. And part of it is because like I'm sure many of the people listening have been there or at least really want to go. And the enchantment you can experience just getting off the main drag, especially like when it's not the peak of the tourist season.
Yep.
It's nothing quite like it.
Just kind of wandering the
Totally.
back streets. Yeah.
And part of it too, I love being in spaces that feel medieval, like, a city center of York, for example, is just one of
Yep.
the most medieval feeling cities on earth when it comes to the European Middle Ages. But like experiencing Venice at kind of its height, the full power of that empire and feeling what it would be in the imperial center, I think that'd be pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. it's such a really interesting answer too, because it defies so many expectations about the medieval / kind of early modern world, because it's a city awash in color.
Yeah.
It's a city abounding, as you said, in different languages.
Yep.
It's a city abounding in people who look very different from one another, right? Because it's the center kind of the Mediterranean world, and a world actually even beyond that, right? Extending all the way into Asia, like down into Africa.
Oriented outwards toward away from Europe. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Like, and just to see like that this was vibrant, and not to say, of course, like I always have to say this caveat, not that there weren't lots of terrible things.
Yeah.
And there weren't terrible people, I'm sure, in early 1500s Venice, but at the same time, like this was normal. Like nobody thought it was super weird. Like,
absolutely,
other people might come to Venice and say like, oh, this is not the place that I live, but like it was expected that this world was interconnected in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's tremendously exciting to think about.
So do you ever ask students where they would go if they had a time machine?
I don't.
I'm always curious. And, I'm teaching my intro class soon, so I feel like I should.
Yeah, you should. Part of it for my kids is I'm a little worried that I'd have to do too much explaining as to why that's not the place you want to go. It's like, I want to go back to ancient Rome. It's like, well, okay, what are you talking in the, couple thousand years? And it's like, like before there were emperors. It's like, how much before? Because that century before was, you don't want to be there. That's not great. And if you're a young woman giving me that answer, it's like, there's probably no time or place anywhere that you may want to be in ancient Rome, because you're about to learn about this deeply patriarchal system. So it's tricky with my age group, I think. Like, I just, if there's an answer that's like, ooh, and maybe half the class gets why it's that way. Yeah. But I might, maybe once we're nearly done with a year, that would be a pretty great. I'm big on check-in questions. All my students know, like, they feel like they're owed a check-in question. If I don't give them one, it's like I've violated their human rights, basically. But that would be a great one for March, April, I think.
Yeah, you'd have to, like, I'm thinking about this now. Like, you're absolutely right. Like, just kind of putting it out there, I think, would be bad pedagogy, is what it would be.
Going blind.
Yeah, just going blind. And then you'd spend the entire semester saying, like, no, that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Just tell the students they're wrong. No, you're wrong. That's a bad idea.
Nobody
Here's
wins.
Why. But maybe you could kind of caveat it. It's not just like you're safe. You could just be there for an hour, but like you're invisible. Like you're looking through glass or something like that.
There's no danger to you.
There's no danger. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be the only condition by which I would ever consider doing a time machine. Like, I have no desire. I've been studying the past my entire life, but like I like the present. So
I mean, the present is.
I don't like all the present.
It's not great, but like we still have, vaccines for now, and
I like vaccines. Vaccines are good.
Air conditioning,
absolutely.
and Netflix. Like, I mean, come on, now.
Indoor plumbing.
These are triumphs of human progress. I don't want to do without them for more than a couple hours. Are you kidding? I'm very delicate, Matt.
Just to bring things totally full circle,
Please.
We have social media nowadays.
We do. Oh, yeah.
Thank God.
Who could live without that?
Who could live without that?
Yeah.
So on that note, I think we are just about out of time, but this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me, John.
Total pleasure.
If anybody ever wants to find you online or ask you a question or anything like that, where might they be able to do so?
Yeah, I'm most online on Blue Sky at John T.R. Terry. That's probably the only place that I really post anything other than super cute baby pictures, which is a private Instagram account. So, hit me up on Blue Sky.
There you go. Excellent. Yeah. So find John on Blue Sky. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please join us again next week, and we'll be talking about more American medieval. Thanks, John. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of American Medieval, proud member of the Multitude Podcast Collective. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriel, and this episode was edited by Julia Schiffini. The theme song to American Medieval is from the song Sleeping Bags by OTE. If you'd like to support the show, get ad-free episodes, be inscribed into the Book of Life for being a kind and generous soul, and get some other neat bonus stuff, please visit us at patreon.com/American Medieval. Thanks again for listening. See you all soon.